Howdy, everybody.
Howdy.
Welcome to our interview with John and Melissa as we get technical difficulties underway of streaming from Zoom to Facebook and the finagling of all of that. So we are glad you guys are here. John and Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. We are super excited. For you guys that do not know, John and Melissa are friends of ours, and also they are our pastors. And John designed our Hebrew Shebrew website. So a round of applause for that, because we are super, super thankful for that and be able to have a website for tour singles to be able to go to and to be able to meet like-minded people that share the same faith. And so today we get to talk with John and Melissa a little bit about who they are and also their book. John wrote an awesome book. It's called The Marriage Commandments. And so let's go ahead and go.
Great. Well, thanks for having us.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And I just want to say too, I know you introduced us as being part of your church life, but it's an honor and a privilege to have you all in our lives. So known both of you for, I don't know how many years now, a long time. And it's just been absolutely wonderful. So I love what you guys are doing. I'm a big fan. I tell everybody about the Hebrew Shebrew community and stuff. And the reality is, like, you know, there's a lot of dating sites and services and other ways to connect with people. And that's interesting, and that's can be fun and good. But one thing I love about y'all is people are actually getting married and having successful marriages from it. So like, it may not yet have all the bells and whistles or whatever, you know, you always want to dream it into being, but the results speak for themselves. So y'all are doing an incredible job. And I know you spend a ton of time with people one-on-one, let alone just making the whole thing happen. So just know that not only is it noticed, it is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate being able to text and be like, hey, I have a problem. How do I fix this?
Yes, every website is always a work in progress. That's the nature of the beast.
For sure, for sure. So tell us a little bit about why did you come up with this book and sort of like the thought behind it. How long have you two been married? You know, I guess let's start a little bit about your family and, you know, just some of that kind of stuff. And then, because I'm assuming that's probably part of, you know, the reason behind some things.
Yes.
Yeah. So we met when we were children. Our families met. I was about 9 years old and John was about 12 years old. And our families became close friends. I lived in Florida and John lived in Tennessee. But we saw each other once a year at conferences that our families helped host. And from there, we started just messaging online and emailing one another. And then when I was
in the teen years, I was in college.
John was in college. He would come down to visit, and I'd say we kind of dated long distance for about a year, and we were engaged for a year, and then we got married the year that he graduated from college and I had graduated from high school.
Okay.
Starting off fresh. But
we've been married 14 years this year, and it just keeps getting better.
Wow. So you were engaged in high school.
Yeah.
Yes, against conventional wisdom. You know, it's one of those things when you're young, it doesn't seem that young. When you're young, you think you're old, but when you get older, you realize how young you were. Yeah. But our parents were very kind and I think saw the wisdom in it. So, and we've never had any regrets about it. So the Lord's blessed us despite ourselves.
Yep. So now we have 3 kids. We have 2 boys and a girl, and we homeschool them, as well as pastoring Mercy Collective. And then John has his marketing agency that he runs out of our house as well.
Okay. Busy.
Yeah.
Yes. There's always a million things to do and probably a million other ones we should be doing that we haven't even got to yet. So the book, though, in particular that you brought up, that was sort of in my mind, at least, it started as a Bible study. Okay. We had just kind of started our church efforts. We didn't really know what it was going to be at the time, but what became our church, just doing Sabbath gatherings with other believers. And started just exploring the Ten Commandments and working through some stuff. And then at the same time, being relatively new in our marriage, when you get married, everybody has all these books they recommend. And everyone's always like, you should read this book and you should read that book. And, some are better than others. A lot of them are wonderful. But one of the things that I felt was missing is that there wasn't really anything in our faith community that I could readily hand somebody without having to have all sorts of asterisks and explanations and other things. And there also wasn't anything that addressed a more comprehensive approach. So there's a lot of books like Love and Respect, which is good. And I think it explains a lot of good concepts, but it kind of, sometimes it seems like those books are missing the fact that sometimes both of those things are needed by both people. And so there's other books that are out there like Garden of Peace and others that a lot of people have turned to, and there's a lot of wisdom in those. But sometimes the advice and the instruction is very one directional. Sort of like, men, if you do this, women will do this, and vice versa. But I think the reality is, and I think for most people's experiences, when you talk to them, all humans kind of want mostly the same things. And when you look at God's relationship with us, he doesn't treat us differently necessarily based on our gender or role or age or other things like that. There's just sort of some basic core truths to humanity and what our needs are that I think are universal. That's been my experience. And so that kind of set me down this path of not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel, because the world already has a million marriage books. And so it's not necessarily to explain all the ins and outs of how to have a great marriage, or here's 10 tips for talking, or, all these kind of things that people do, which have value, but it's more of just kind of setting a baseline standard for like, what actually is a marriage? What should a marriage be? And not necessarily even from my experience, but just from, what does the Bible say about having a covenanted relationship with another entity? What does that look like? What are the hallmarks of it? And then within that, as I was kind of diving through all this stuff and exploring it, this was several years ago now, but some things just became very blindingly obvious. And when you tie them back, concepts like honoring and being truthful and these sorts of things that God laid out with his covenant with his people, you realize like, oh, that's when you're looking at different situations, you're like, oh, well, the issue that this couple is having, or the issue that we're having, or whatever, is because in some way we've missed one of those very fundamental core components of what a relationship or a marriage or a covenant should be. So that's kind of the framework for it. It's not necessarily a how-to book. A lot of people really enjoy those things that just boil it down to like, on Tuesday night, do this, on Wednesday, do that, and that can be fine if that's the kind of structure you need in your life, if you need that kind of hand holding. But in general, I felt like what was missing, what I couldn't really find, was just something that kind of dialed it back to an even more fundamental level. So that ultimately led to the book. And since then, it's, we get a lot of testimonies, and I hear from people all the time that apparently a lot of people are now using it for marriage counseling, premarital counseling. People, oftentimes, I feel like the most often when people are ordering the book, if I get a chance to hear from them, they say that it's something they're giving to their children or to their mother or their father, or family member, or church member, or somebody who's getting married, just to kind of help them, I think, put some context around what they're about to step into. And in other cases, sometimes when marriages go completely sideways and fall off the rails, it forces couples to start over. One of the great tragedies, I think, of marriage is that, and it's like a lot of human endeavors, but like, we don't do a whole lot of preventative maintenance. So oftentimes we wait until things have gone abysmally to actually learn more, to reset, to try to diagnose things. And I mean, it's not that much different than like any sort of system or function. Like, if you want your car to keep running well, you got to give it tune-ups. You got to pay attention to things. You can wait till it blows up, and then you might have to get a new one. Which I guess that's a very disastrous metaphor for marriage, but unfortunately, it's a condition a lot of people find themselves in.
Yes.
And so it's one of those things where hopefully an easy way to kind of get people to just think about some of their approaches to the
Yeah.
situation they found themselves in. So
That is very true. It is a book that we recommend, for people. When I have different people that ask, okay, Sarah, what books do you recommend? It's honestly one of the first books that I, recommend to people to go ahead and read, because it's not gender specific. It's for every person, and versus, like you said, some of the other books they're not for our same faith, and so because of that, it makes it difficult when you are trying to minister to somebody who believes in the same thing, that you do, but you're reading something that might not fall within the same lines that you are wanting.
yeah.
So it's difficult.
Exactly. I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of times with a lot of topics, it's not just marriage, but I mean, there's books on everything out there.
Yeah.
A lot of times people try to rope in so many different things that while you're trying to get parenting advice or marriage advice or whatever, you end up getting a dose of other religions, you get a dose of certain political perspectives and other things. And certainly this book, I mean, it only applies kind of in the context of a biblical male, female, heterosexual, monogamous marriage. That's the premise that's stated right on the front end of the book.
Yep.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's really something that whether you're Catholic, Messianic, Baptist, or whatever, it hopefully will not offend you and you'll find truth in it. So
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, I think it's, very, very helpful, because a lot of people, and like you said, a lot of different things, a lot of things we try to do, we try to find out how to do something, but we don't understand initially what that something even is. So, this, book helps you to understand what is marriage. Like not necessarily, like you said, a how-to, but do you understand what it is that you're trying to, what the relationship really is, and the way that it is modeled after the relationship between God and his people.
yeah, I know. I think that's, to me, something that I found lacking in a lot of books. There's a lot of foregone conclusions, I guess, about what a marriage is. In our society, obviously, it's a cultural institution. In our churches, it's been, considered a sacrament of the church since the early Catholic era. But a lot of times people are just going through the ritual. We don't really pay attention to the vows we're making. I mean, half the people, if you ask them, do you remember your wedding vows? They don't, which is crazy, because in most contexts, people only make vows to another human once in their lifetime. And they have a hard time even remembering what some of those core promises were. So you kind of have to dial it way back, unfortunately, and really explain what is a covenant? What is a relationship? What does it mean for all of these things? And why do we as humans, let alone as believers, why do we do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll lay a lot of groundwork, unfortunately, but
yes, that is true. That's
Well,
true.
I mean, it's a very necessary thing to just know what it is that you're trying to do. I mean, I remember an example one time of a football team, very, very old school type thing, and they got beaten very, very badly, so bad that the next week, first day of practice, the coach came in and he showed the guys, he's like, held a football in front, like, this is a football. This is how far back we're going to dial it. I'm going to teach you everything.
Yeah, the fundamentals.
Sometimes you have to, and I think, reading, a book and really studying it, like this book, would help people, to do that. To really understand, either what you have gotten yourself into or what you're thinking about getting yourself into.
Yeah, because the reality of it too is that, the context of marriage, to dial it way back, it was an institution created by God, and a lot of the rituals and the decor and the ceremony of it all we've created over thousands of years.
Yeah.
But the actual act of a man and a woman spending their lives together, becoming one, as scripture says, the whole kit and caboodle, children, if they're blessed in that way, the intertwining of your hearts and minds and spirits, and the psychology of it, the biology of it, literally on every front, this is not new territory. And it was, the fundamentals of it were created by God for a purpose.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a legal arrangement so you can get a tax break or whatever we've turned it into. So that's kind of where, like, even in the book, where it starts is, and the premise of the whole book essentially is that if we want to have better marriages, and granted, we're all deeply imperfect, every marriage is going to have their own struggles and stuff. But if you want your marriage to get better or to be as good as it can be, then maybe you should start by knowing what it is. And maybe your marriage, instead of being modeled after soap operas and reality shows and starlets and all the people that are out there, maybe instead we should actually model our marriage after the ideal that's given to us by God, which was the marriage between God himself and his people Israel, which we see exemplified at Mount Sinai. The prophets talk about how that was essentially a marriage between God and humanity, where he had betrothed them to him, he had married them, he had taken them as a wife. Unfortunately, we know later on that Israel was not entirely faithful to their covenant, but still the ideals that were there, that were instituted by God himself, by the literal mouth of Yahweh on Mount Sinai, that maybe within those 10 commandments, as we know them, that there are elements or practices or at least principles that if they were dependent, if Israel's relationship and covenant with God was dependent on that, maybe ours should at least embrace those principles as well. So, and from there, the book explains each of the 10 commandments and then at least one angle on how each of them has a principle inherent in it that ties back to marriage, and why so often in our marriages and the marriages of those around us, the places where we fail. And I would submit that maybe the places where we fail, you can usually trace it directly back to the violation of one of those 10 principles. I've never seen a divorced couple or a separated couple or anybody who's struggling with their marriage one way or the other not be the victim of someone in the relationship, perhaps both people in the relationship, getting one of those 10 principles wrong. And so the consequences are huge, of course. People's lives are at stake, but getting it right is also a possibility. So we want to do the best we can.
And getting back on track, that's the thing too. It's like, okay, if you can come to the place of, yes, I made a mistake, I want to go ahead and fix this. Let's go ahead and move forward and try to fix it, set up that relationship back up again, and try to restore if it can be restored.
And even beyond relationships, though, I think if you can understand, this gets into a lot of our faith and what we believe, I know collectively, but the relationship that we have as individuals, let alone the collective relationship that all believers are supposed to have with the Father, is contingent on certain principles. The ability for that relationship to be successful and to be rewarding, and it's not going to, God's not going to fail, but we certainly have a long history of doing so. And so in as much as we have our relationships that we learn through and learn from, all of those things, I believe, were created by God so that we could better understand how we are supposed to be interacting with him. I think that's the whole reason why we have marriage in the first place. That's the whole reason why God gave Adam Eve. It wasn't just so that we could have kind of a secularized human marriage experience, but it was so that we could learn more about the nature of God. And I think when done properly, and anybody I know who's in what I would consider to be a successful marriage, a marriage they're grateful for, and a marriage where there's love and generosity and other things, if they're believers, I think they readily understand that. If they're not, they might be missing the picture, but they probably can still be blessed despite their ignorance. So it's complex.
It is.
Definitely if we could understand everything there is to know about him, then he wouldn't need these kind of metaphors, symbology and things like that. But that's why he, like you said, he speaks to us through those relationships so that we can understand a little bit better something that's practical in front of our faces.
For sure. And I think just as humans, the propagation of the entire human race is dependent on men and women having relationships with one another.
Mhm.
If it were not for that fundamental aspect of our biology and physiology, we would not be here today. And if you think about it, even on that end, so literally every person alive today is alive because two people got together. And for the most part, throughout history, those people would have been getting together in the context of marriage.
Yeah.
And so I know right now there's a lot of people who are skeptical of marriage. There's all sorts of alternatives and you could say attacks on marriage. But we really owe a debt of gratitude
Mhm.
for our entire civilization and history, for the fact that this has been an institution that has survived. And I don't think it's just an institution. I also think it's an act of spirituality. I think it's a gift from God. And I think the only reason why it survived all these years is not because of the more human sides of who we are. It's because of the spiritual nature of the very act of marriage and of covenant and relationships and the interplay between all of that. So something needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
It definitely does, and that's something that we unfortunately see is some people don't take it so serious, and they don't want to fall within that covenant relationship, and they say that they are, but they're truly not. And it's definitely a struggle,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And all these things too, they have consequences. Like we live in this world today where,
Yes.
at least in pop culture, I don't know how widespread it actually is among the populace, but the agenda or the message that's being pushed down our throats is that marriage is sort of inconsequential. It can be whatever you want it to be. You want to have an open marriage. You want to have a throuple. You want to, there's all these crazy terms coming out of the woodwork, even polygamy and stuff. This was not the way God intended it. And that has never changed throughout society. And the success stories of people who have chosen alternatives to it are few and far between. And so at no point in society, it's not like we're the first to invent infidelity, or it's not like we're the first people or the first culture on earth to decide that people could have multiple partners or whatever. But the history of all of those things has never worked out well, and it's never become widespread despite being tried time and time again. So
Yeah.
I think we have to hold to what's true and hold to what we know. And to a certain extent in this day and age, it's like we got to kind of stand our ground, because there's a lot of people, even if they're single or out there looking or not looking, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. And so you get a lot of people either wondering whether or not they're even having a healthy, godly relationship is ever going to be possible again. Because unfortunately there's a lot of garbage, but I think we could be optimistic, because despite all the craziness of this world, despite the Romans, despite the Greeks, despite everybody else, God's ways still stand. And I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's still, got his people out there. Just like we've seen over and over through the scriptures, people think that they're alone and they're the last one left. It's like, no, there's still more of my people out there. And I mean, if people are feeling that they're alone and they're never going to find that person, well, they just can't give in to that kind of thinking and nonsense, because God has plenty of people out there.
For sure.
I mean, plenty of people. It's just a matter of, putting yourself in the right places to be able to meet them.
Yeah.
And not thinking he's gonna, like the paraplegic that came down through the roof on Yeshua. He's not just gonna drop him through the roof onto your couch, in the living room. You gotta get out in the places where you can meet.
For sure.
Yes. So what advice or things that you have for the singles that are out there? What kind of things would you go ahead and say or give, to some of them that are, out there looking and wondering and things like that?
Well, the main thing I would say is, and I know that you talk about this in your Hebrews sites and groups and things, is just being equally yoked with the other person that you're considering being married to. I mean, we've known so many people that have gone into marriages with someone who had differing opinions or theologies on life. And it doesn't mean that every single little thing has to match up, but the major beliefs and goals in your life should line up, because when they don't, the marriages tend to not last.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's why we have the instruction not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And it's not just talking about marriage, but it obviously also is talking about marriage.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, because time and time again, you see, and we've probably all seen, anybody who's spent a significant amount of time in the church or in any faith community, you see couples, relationships and stuff where one person is very strong in the faith and they fall in love or are attracted to someone who is not, or at least doesn't share their same level of passion. And the net result is never, from my experience, it's never that the other person becomes on fire because of the beliefs of the other person. I mean, at least 9 times out of 10, it goes the other way.
Yeah.
And the person who has weaker faith, or the person who is less assured of their, even just religion for that matter, you'd be surprised what people are insecure about. They tend to be the anchor that drags it down. And so rather than, you know, an unbeliever and a believer getting together and them both becoming rock solid believers, which does happen occasionally, but 9 times out of 10, it goes the exact opposite direction. And I know a lot of people, especially when they're dating or dating people that are not of the similar faith, or courting, whatever term you want to use for trying to track someone down.
Yeah.
They're very optimistic. They're like, oh, I think they're learning. I think this person's coming along. I think this person's going to share my beliefs at some point. But unfortunately, the evangelism usually goes the other way.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people think that it's sort of a ministry or a mission, that somehow they're serving as a romantic missionary to another person. But
Nope.
but for that matter, you also have to consider that the other person, whether or not they realize it, is a missionary to you for an alternative set of values and faith.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that, like, in our congregation, we tend to have some older single people, which kind of seems to be a normal thing in the Messianic Hebrew roots movement. But I know a lot of our friends are like, well, where do you find a spouse? And my advice is go to the places that, like, envision a person or a personality that you would love to be with, that you would love to spend forever with, and go to those places, or go to those churches, go to those groups, be proactive about actually finding someone. Don't just expect that if you're sitting on your couch, you're going to find someone, or if you're going to the bar, you're going to find someone that has the same values that you have. Like, you have to be proactive. If you want a Messianic spouse that has the same beliefs as you, visit all the Messianic congregations in your state. And look around, like, go to the places that you envision that type of person.
Yeah. It's like you have to show up to go to the events. You know, you need to go to the conferences. You need to go to, you know, the places that people are going to go ahead and be, you know, at, because it's like, you're right. You're not going to meet somebody at a bar. You know, I was having a conversation with somebody and I asked him that. I said, okay, what kind of girl, woman are you looking for? You know, and he gave these different qualities and stuff. And I said, okay, where are you meeting people? Where are you going? And he's like, well, I'm going to a bar. I'm like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you can find someone, and if you end up getting in a relationship with them, it'll probably not end up working out and you'll waste your time.
Yeah. It's, I mean, there's nothing wrong with going to a bar and having a drink, but it's a matter of, okay, are you trying to find somebody just for a one night stand, or are you looking for a long-term relationship and somebody that has the same faith and same foundation, like you guys talked about, you know, being equally yoked? And yep, it's true.
Unfortunately, where you fish it makes a big determination on what kind of fish you're going to find.
Very true.
So, I mean, I think another mistake a lot of people are making, especially in this generation, is we've substituted in-person interactions for Facebook doom scrolling and social media, Instagram, TikTok, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And there are an abundance of people who are very prolific and very outspoken on social media or forums or websites
Yes.
And that persona is not necessarily indicative of the type of person they actually are.
Yep.
And so it's one thing to meet online, it's one thing to connect online, but put yourself in a situation where you will actually experience the person humanly, not just online.
Yes.
And I think I love that y'all do events, you do so many other things, and even encourage, like, talk to people on the phone. Like, don't just fall in love with someone because they send you messages, and to a certain extent, it's like people kind of catfish themselves. They have this fantasy about who this person is they're talking to based on what they think they're posting or their motivations or whatever. But and it's not impossible, but it's difficult. So
yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, there's a couple of people online who are saying the exact same thing. One person's like, go to Revive, and it's like, it is, it's true. It's like, that's why we do these events at these conferences, for people to be able to meet, and have a retreat time frame that we do, because it's like, you never know where you might meet somebody, and it's a matter of just talking to the humans, you have the conversation with the people.
Just be human, y'all.
Yes.
I mean, you never really know. I mean, like, you might go to a place and there's nobody there to talk to but a elderly old lady, and you're kind of young, but guess what? You get to start talking to her and she's got a nephew, or she's, I mean, she knows this person. This
you got to network.
Yes.
I mean, back in the day, in primitive times or Bible times, or even up until modern society, like, people had towns and everybody actually knew everybody. And if you wanted to get water, you had to go to the watering hole just like everybody else. And so people were forced to interact. Now we live in these very isolated, siloed, kind of self-built echo chambers, where you end up kind of really isolating yourself from the broad spectrum of humanity. And when you're looking for someone who is not currently in your life, the reality of the situation is that, like, if you haven't found someone yet, you need to change your circle. Like, you need to get out of your self-imposed isolation. And if there's not somebody in your current circle, you're gonna have to go to a different one, or just wait and be content in waiting. That's another option. But if you don't change something, nothing's ever gonna change. So
exactly. Yeah. I had a friend who was my dating coach, and we would get together once a week, and she would ask me, she'd be like, okay, Sarah, where did you go today? What did you do this week? How did you expand your circle? And it was rough for me, because I'd be like, well, I went to the supermarket. She's like, well, did you talk to anybody? And I'm like, no, I didn't. But I did see this cute person there. She's like, well, why didn't you go up to him and say something, or make small talk, or, things like that. And it is, you have to expand your circle. You have to change your route. You have to change your, whatever it is that you do to be able to meet that person. And
yeah. I would also advise anybody who's out there. I know there's a lot of single people, but for anybody who may watch this, look at your social circle, and if everybody around you is kind of like you, then you probably need to try somewhere else if you're having a hard time meeting people. I think it's human nature that, like, single dudes tend to hang out with single dudes. Divorced women tend to hang out with divorced women. Married couples hang out with married couples. But then what happens when you're not married? And so whatever your situation is, if you're looking at your circumstances and you're not able to find somebody, and you're trying to think of what you might need to change, look and see where you're too similar. If you're a single woman who's only hanging out with single women,
how are you going to find,
and you go to a church or Bible studies, and all your whole life is wrapped around this squad of wonderful women, I'm sure.
Yes.
But what do you think happens when a dude pops in the circle? I mean, A, there's a lot of competition, but B, like, that's not an ideal place to stand out, or even just to make a human connection. It's not like we're trying to force anything that wouldn't naturally occur otherwise. But if you're isolating yourself, which in a free country, every decision we make is something we're doing to ourselves socially, then it might be time to expand your horizons. Go to a different church. There's plenty. I'm not saying you have to leave your current church, but there are plenty of churches that meet at all hours of the day. Go find another one and do that one too.
Yeah, change your home
Yeah.
fellowship, I mean, if you're only meeting with home fellowships and it's the same group of people and you're not meeting somebody, you might need to branch out, and go
Yeah.
check out other communities. And
And also just let it be known that you're searching. And
Yeah.
this is true whether or not, I mean, there's a lot of people who are divorced and it's kind of a gray area for a lot of people. No one's really sure if that person is searching or not. Same thing with just young folks who may have never been married or whatever the situation is. Let people know that you are interested in finding someone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I know in our insecurity, a lot of times we try to pretend like, oh, I'm fine, everything's great, I have everything I need. We kind of just blow it off like, I don't really think I want a relationship. It's kind of a sour grapes thing. Like if you don't have one, a lot of times it's easy to just pretend like you didn't want one in the first place. But if you're sincerely are searching, let people know you are searching.
Yes.
Like even as a pastor and as someone who kind of talks a lot about these kinds of issues, there are a ton of times when I'm talking to someone and they're like, oh, I've been single for so long or whatever. And I'm like, well, are you looking? Like, are you actually like available? Are you interested in having a relationship? And they're like, oh yeah, I guess so. And it's like,
Well, why didn't you tell us?
if
We
you'd have
could've
told me
been
this
looking
years
for
ago,
ya.
I could have helped you out. Like, where everybody knows us people. So
Yeah.
let it be known. And you don't have to be overly dramatic about it,
Yeah.
but just a subtle tip, especially to friends and family, people you trust, let them know whether or not you are looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you are very content in whatever situation your life's in, that's awesome too. And in which case, you may also want to let people know that you're not interested,
Mhm.
just so you're not wasting anybody else's time. But
Yes. Yep. Hey, it worked for us. I
It
mean,
did.
you brought us together.
It
So
Yeah.
It did. It did.
yes, but that's the thing. I mean, it's amazing how sometimes just letting people know,
yeah.
and letting other people help other people know can go a really long way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because there are all sorts of complexities involved in it, but sometimes you just gotta lower the ego a little bit and just admit, like, yeah, I'm searching and haven't found anybody.
Yeah. That or what is wrong, not wrong with me, but what's wrong with me? Like what do you see
Yeah.
in my life? What's a flaw that I have that I might need to go ahead and fix? I mean, it's vulnerable asking that. But if you have some really good friends, guy friends, girlfriends, that you're able to go ahead and ask that, you're able to have those conversations and be like, hey, what is it? Am I putting off this era? I mean, I had one person tell me at Sukkot, he's like, Sarah, he's like, there's no way I would have talked to you last year because you were completely standoffish and just not open. And I was like, really? I did not see myself that way.
Right.
But he's like, this year, he's like, you're completely different. You are completely open. And I can tell that God has done a good work in you in a matter of a year. And I was like, wow, I had like no clue, about that. And that was the year before us. And so it was that year that
It was
God
that year.
started to do stuff,
that year.
And so it's just cool to be able to see what God does, and how he directs things, but you have to be vulnerable too. You have to ask and you just have to ask and then work on it. Figure out and be like, okay, I'm putting the work in. How do I need to change myself to get myself ready for that relationship?
Yeah, because we're all flawed. Like we
Yes.
obviously all have issues that
Yes.
we could work on.
Yes.
But yeah, if you're having a hard time finding someone, maybe that self-reflection is what you need to do.
Yeah.
How can I make myself a catch?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Exactly.
or at least not repulsive. Like that's a good starting ground for people. I mean, we've all known that guy where you're just like, dude, have you smelled yourself lately? But the truth is, people can't smell themselves very well. So someone needs to tell them, and that's why we have friends.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Like it's not rocket science. But the other crazy thing about humans is generally on major life decisions, if you will yield that life decision to other people, they tend to do a great job of actually providing really good advice.
Yeah.
Whether it's buying a home, buying a car, or even like finding someone to begin a relationship with. Obviously, they're not going to make the final decision for you. But if you just say, hey, is there anybody you know of that maybe I should go on a date with?
Mhm.
they will probably know somebody. And if
Yeah.
you just take their golly gee advice and just go with it, like worst case scenario, you're at an awkward Applebee's experience. But like, what have you lost? Nothing really. Like, give it a shot. Trust your friends, trust your community, and you can always say no.
Yeah.
but at least be open to the suggestion of others, because oftentimes your friends, your family, I mean, they know what you truly need better than you do. Depending on who they are, of course. With all these things, you got to put an asterisk on it, because there are awful people in the world. But just be open for it. Because the other thing too that I think about a lot is Scripture says that we have a Father in heaven who gives good gifts. That if you ask for a fish, he's not going to give you a snake, you know. And the reality is he actually wants to give you good things. And Scripture says that every good and perfect gift comes from above. It also says that whoever finds a wife finds a good thing. And so the reality is too, that I think especially for a lot of people who've been single for a while, that the truth that they need to realize is that God actually wants to bless you. And it may not necessarily always be in a marriage, but it can absolutely be in some sort of meaningful relationship. Obviously, certain people like the Apostle Paul were called to a certain degree of celibacy during their lives. And that's great. But if that's your calling, you're going to be happy with it. If you're sitting here in misery because that's something you think that has been imposed upon you, then I would just suggest that people trust that the Father is trying to and wanting to give them something good. And because of that, choose actions and behaviors that correspond with that. Don't live your life in isolation. Don't put yourself out of the way of finding someone. And so, like, I mean, it's kind of you have to set your own expectations. But I also don't think God makes singleness a punishment for people. Marriage is supposed to be a blessing, but he's not going out of his way to keep you single, as I've heard people suggest before.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. And Sarah has had to deal with that, you know, multiple times, you know, about, I just don't think that there's anybody for me. I think that I'm, just not supposed to do this. And I think your typical response, has been, well, is the desire in your heart? I mean, like, why would he give you that desire and not allow you to have it fulfilled?
The blessings of God don't always come on our preferred timetable, and they don't always come in the form that we want. I think a lot of people, they're like, I just really, really, really want to be married. There's nothing I want more in my life than to be married. And they make all these dramatic claims.
Yeah.
And then someone comes along and they're like, oh, well, I was hoping for someone a little skinnier, or I was hoping for someone, whatever weird criteria they have.
Yes.
I was really hoping to marry a Jewish man, or I was really hoping to marry, like, stop. Like, you've made an idol out of your own expectation at that point, rather than just accepting what it is that the Lord, or at least being open to the possibility that this person or these people could be, ones who you're supposed to start having a conversation with.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that is true. There was a question that came in. So Petra asked, church reminds me of not being taught Torah, celebrating the pagan holidays. How you see that? So I don't know if she's talking about the word church, going to other churches. I don't think you're talking about going to other churches per se, but just getting out and getting to other communities, going to places and figuring stuff out. I mean, for a while I needed fellowship. So I actually joined a Christian church that was down the street from me, and I joined their singles group because I needed fellowship. I needed to be around other people. I needed another outlet. And so I joined another Bible study, and it actually was a great Bible study. And what was interesting is I met this lady who was married to a Jewish man, where they did Shabbat, and parts of our study that we were actually talking about talked a little bit about the Jewish heritage. And I was able to give my insight into that part of the study because of what I already knew. And so it was quite interesting to be able to be a witness to those people. And actually three of us got married out of that group. Now,
Wow.
2 of them met in that group. The other people, we didn't meet in that group, but it was just interesting though, being a part of another Bible study, a Christian Bible study, but it was good in a way to be able to get out and to just meet other people. And that was my thing. It's like, I was strong enough in my faith that I could go ahead and go out and meet other people, become a part of another Bible study and get out there, because it was like, I needed that. I needed that fellowship of other people.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I know the term church can be triggering for people because they may associate it with the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But when I'm saying that word, I'm just talking about the community of believers. Get together with, I mean, literally taking it back to its Greek meaning of just an assembly. Any sort of gathering of other believers who may or may not be as doctrinally on par with you, but but people who sincerely love the Lord and are sincerely pursuing him. They may not be checking all the boxes. They may not have every single thing figured out. But in my opinion, those people are, they're part of it's not our church. We pastor a church, but it's not our church. First Baptist down the road, or whatever churches you may think are in your community, it's not, if they're godly, it's not their church. The assembly is the Lord's assembly. And within assemblies all around the world, there are people who sincerely love the Lord, who are sincerely doing the best they can with whatever information or history or tradition they've been given. And so I wouldn't rule out somebody just because they're not in your particular denomination or your particular non-denomination, or maybe they don't dress like you do. Maybe they don't, keep every holiday the way you keep holidays or whatever. But pretty soon, I think if you start to talk to people, you can usually parse through and figure out who's got a heart for the Father and who does not. And so when I say go to other churches, I mean, find those other groups of believers that are getting together. It may be a Sunday church. There's traditional Sunday churches that meet on Saturdays now. There's groups that meet on Friday nights. There's just here in our city, I mean, you could probably hit up 10 different services in just one weekend. If you started Friday night and went through Sunday evening, and I think if you're actually sincerely interested in seeing what's out there, that might be a good place to start.
And I think the Father's opening up so many people's eyes right now to his feasts and his commandments. And just because it's a Sunday church doesn't mean that there aren't people that attend there that don't keep the Sabbath and don't keep the feasts. We know several different friends that are technically on the same walk belief system as us, but they attend a Sunday church because that's what's in their community. And they have friends and family there, and they actually are a witness to those people, and the people that attend the church are actually wanting to know more about the Sabbath, more about the feast. So I wouldn't just rule out regular Christian churches.
And I would suggest too, in concurrence with that, and granted, there's no polling on these things, so all I have is my anecdotal experiences. But I would suggest that there are probably as many feast keeping, Sabbath keeping, Yeshua loving, and saying folks in traditional Christian evangelical churches today. There's probably as many there as there are that have come out or whatever and are attending exclusively Messianic or Hebraic or whatever term you want to use congregations. A lot of people just either don't know what's out there or they have other reasons for being there. So even if those are deal breakers for you, and they would be for me, even before we got married, I knew that I wanted to marry someone who kept the Sabbath. I knew I wanted to marry somebody who ate a certain way, who did certain things that were biblical that I believed firmly in. But her family was going to a regular old Christian church. Mm-hmm. They were just at a regular old Pentecostal, whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Non-denominational church, but
they shared all the same beliefs.
We still kept the feast. We still kept the Sabbath. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of like Mark was saying earlier, sometimes it feels like you're all alone in the world, but you're crying out to Yahweh and he's like, you know what, there's actually thousands more. Don't get so caught up in your loneliness that you think you're the only one. And I think even in our towns and stuff, it's easy to look at, having grown up in this faith, it's easy to look at people and be like, well, there's only the 4 families that we know of in our town who believe like we do. I can pretty much guarantee you that is not true. Unless your town is literally only 4 families. God's people are everywhere, and they're doing his work in all sorts of settings and environments.
Just gotta stop fishing in one small pond. And
Yeah.
go
Not
to
rocket
small
science, but
ponds, go to bigger ponds.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think too, it's even
What's
beyond
that
like
time?
the single. When we think of singles, a lot of times we think of people of a certain age who have either become divorced or never married or have been widowed or something like that. But even for people who are trying to help steer their children towards spouses and trying to find compatible partners, people in their teens, their 20s, 30s, I think all those same principles still apply. Just because you look around and haven't found, a husband for your daughter or whatever, she hasn't found a husband for herself, that doesn't mean that they aren't out there. But if you're never leaving your own 4 walls and they're not coming in,
Yes.
then you probably need to broaden your horizons,
Yeah.
because this world is full of wonderful people.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it's also full of wonderful, lonely people who want to meet people just like you. Yeah, infomercial all of a sudden.
Yes. Yes. So you can join HebrewShebrew.com.
Exactly. No, but yes, do that. And I'm saying this sincerely. I have no vested financial stake in this, but get connected. Hebrew. There's other sites and services out there. Even just signing up lets people know that you're searching,
Yeah.
and lets people who you would never meet otherwise at least be aware of your existence. And they may not be the one for you, but people know people, and you got to network. So
Yeah, you do. You have to network, and you sort of have to sell yourself. Unfortunately, that's honestly what it is you are selling yourself. You are pitching yourself. And it's a matter of just putting yourself out there.
yeah, and it's not like it's not any different than what humans have been doing for literally thousands of years. This is how societies have always worked.
Yeah.
And so I guess I think a lot of times people are apprehensive to do things like joining services or going to groups, going to singles ministries, other things, because they think somehow it's like embarrassing or shameful, or like that they failed in some aspect of life.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's literally one of the most natural human things you can do. My grandparents in the early 1900s, they met at a singles event that was hosted through their churches in their little small town. Like, this is how people have always met.
Yep.
The only thing that's new is that now there's an internet component for communication. But otherwise, just get out there and do it. It's perfectly normal. It's perfectly healthy. And even statistically, people who meet online actually get married sooner and stay married longer and have happier marriages than people who meet in any other context. So a lot of times people are always like trying to go to bars, trying to meet people, at work or wherever they end up hanging out.
Yeah.
And that can work out sometimes. But if you want the best odds, the internet's actually been proven to be the way to do it. So
there we go. See, reason why we have Hebrew.
Yeah, it's all just about communication.
It is.
So, anything that enables more people to communicate better is going to be an asset. So
it is.
If you're watching and you're single, use those assets.
Very true. Very true.
Yep. You gotta have the right things in your tool bag. That was one of the videos we put back. What's in your dating toolkit? And that's a very good thing. It's a useful tool to be used.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And if I would say too, to rope all this back to the beginning of our conversation. And to give a plug for johndiff.com.
Yes.
And the marriage commandments. I think a lot of people love the idea of being in a relationship more than they actually even want to be in a relationship. They love the idea of being loved. They don't necessarily look forward to the sacrificial side of it. I think for a lot of people, marriage and being married, especially in churches and religious communities, even Hebraic communities, probably even more so, but marriage is kind of a status symbol, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because we do want to encourage marriage in our communities. It's a very human thing to do. But if you're pursuing it for the status symbol, or if you're pursuing it for the connotations that now you'll be considered a whole person, or whatever you've convinced yourself of, it's a dangerous motivation. So I would encourage anybody, if you are single, like, maybe start by resetting. At any age, you may be 16 years old thinking about your eventual marriage, or you may be 60 years old thinking about your next marriage. Whatever the case may be, start by laying a very strong foundation for what is an actual marriage. And especially if you come from difficult or toxic relationships. I mean, we talk to people all the time who have never had a good relationship. There are people who, from the time, from childhood, their father abused their mother. Throughout high school, they were, taken advantage of over and over again. They may have been in love a million times, but sometimes people have never been in a healthy relationship, and they've never seen a healthy relationship. And honestly, they wouldn't know what a healthy relationship was if it was staring them in the face. And so to that extent, I think if you are aware of the fact that you're coming from a difficult situation, and you, for whatever reason, the Father has given you this time of singleness, don't waste it. Use that time to recalibrate everything you think you know about what a marriage is, how it should work, and what the purposes of it are from God's perspective. And then from there, you may come out with a completely different perspective that changes not only the type of marriage or relationship you have in the future, but it could even change the type of person you'd be looking for now. And so, just do not waste the time that you have while you're single. Use it to figure it out. And if the thing you want to figure out is this marriage and relationships thing, put in the time. I mean, you can go to marriage counseling without being married. You could you could read a lot of books without having to actually be yet even in a relationship. So putting in the time, let alone, of course, reading the only book that actually matters, scriptures, to figure out what God's plan is for all of it. And why would God want someone like you to be married? And if you have a clear sense of that, I think it becomes a lot easier to find what you're looking for. But if you can't answer those questions, then you're always going to be at a disadvantage trying to figure this thing out.
That's very true. That's very true.
Remember, folks, if you're wanting to do what he was talking about and recalibrating, understanding what marriage really is, useful tool. You can find this at johndiff.com, right? Is there? There's
also on Amazon and everywhere else. You can just Google it; you'll find it.
Find it there, and there's lots of good articles on your blog as well. So avail yourself of everything that he's got there for free for you guys, because it's some really good content, really good stuff. But definitely for your purposes, in learning what the marriage really is and what he was talking about. Man, it's not a thick book. It's rich, but it's not thick. You can read it easily, quickly, a few different times, and get a lot out of it.
That's true. Well, thank you very much, John and Melissa, for tuning in. I so appreciate you guys joining us and doing this, with us and for us and everything, and appreciate all of your advice and just words of wisdom that you have to share, with the singles community and with, even married folks that might be tuning in as well, because it's just good information that's out there. So I definitely appreciate it. Thank you very much. And bye, Facebook world. We are going to end you all, but we are grateful you guys watched and tuned in, and thank you very much. Have a great night, you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark and Sarah.